I found a millionaire's wallet while searching for a job on the street. I had no idea he'd fall madly in love with me. And what happened next changed everything. My name is Hope Matthews. I'm 23 years old, and this is the story of how a simple leather wallet changed my destiny forever. But before I tell you about that wallet, I need to take you back to the day my world completely crumbled beneath my feet. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I got the call that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. I was in my apartment. Well, what used to be my apartment in the Matthews family estate, sipping coffee and reading a book when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold, professional, detached. "Miss Matthews, this is Officer Rodriguez from the LAPD. I'm afraid I have some devastating news about your father." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, crashing against the marble floor of the kitchen. I can still hear that sound sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep. It was the sound of my old life ending. Dad was gone. Richard Matthews, the man who taught me that honesty was worth more than gold, who built a jewelry empire from nothing, who promised me he'd always be there to protect me. He was gone. A car accident, they said. His brakes had failed on the winding roads up in Malibu. He'd crashed into a tree at 60 miles per hour. I remember collapsing right there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, sobbing until my chest hurt. Dad was only 52. He was supposed to walk me down the aisle someday, supposed to meet his grandchildren, supposed to grow old and tell terrible dad jokes at family dinners for decades to come. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and fake sympathy. Beverly, my stepmother, played the grieving widow perfectly. She'd only been married to Dad for 2 years, but she acted like she'd lost the love of her life. I was too destroyed by grief to notice how calculated her performance was, how her tears seemed to dry up the moment she thought no one was looking. It was 3 days after the funeral when everything truly fell apart. I was in Dad's study, going through his papers, trying to understand the business he'd left behind. That's when I found it. A sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting. Inside was a will I'd never seen before, dated just 6 months earlier. My hands shook as I read it. Dad had left everything to me. The entire jewelry empire, the estate, all of it. But there was a condition. I wouldn't inherit until I turned 25. Until then, Beverly would be the administrator. But only the administrator. She had no legal claim to any of it. I felt this surge of relief mixed with confusion. Why hadn't Dad told me about this? Why the secrecy? I found out why 30 minutes later when Beverly walked into the study with 2 men in expensive suits. Lawyers, apparently. "Hope, darling," she said in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. "We need to talk." That's when my world truly collapsed. Beverly had her own set of documents that painted a very different picture. According to her lawyers, I wasn't Richard Matthews' legitimate daughter. They claimed my birth certificate was forged, that my mother had lied about my parentage, that I was nothing more than a bastard child with no legal rights to anything. "This is insane," I remember screaming. "Dad is my father, you know that." But Beverly just smiled that cold smile and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Hope, but the DNA tests don't lie." DNA tests. What DNA tests? When had anyone taken my DNA? It gets worse. They had court documents, a temporary restraining order claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. They said I'd been making threats against Beverly, that I'd tried to forge documents to steal Dad's fortune. None of it was true. Not a single word. But they had official papers, signatures, stamps. Everything looked legitimate. "You have 2 hours to pack your things and leave," one of the lawyers said. "If you contest this order, we'll have you arrested." I felt like I was drowning, like the ground beneath my feet had turned to quicksand. How was this possible? How could everything I'd known about my life be a lie? "Beverly, please," I begged. "Dad would never want this. You know he loved me." For just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something cold and victorious. "Richard is dead, Hope, and dead men can't protect anyone." Those words hit me like a physical blow. There was something in the way she said it, something that made my blood run cold. But I was too shocked, too devastated to process what that meant. I packed what I could carry in 2 suitcases, 23 years of life reduced to clothes and a few precious photos of Dad and me. Beverly stood in the doorway watching me, and I swear I could see satisfaction in her expression. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked as I dragged my suitcases toward the front door. "That's not my problem anymore," she replied. And just like that, I was homeless, standing outside the gates of what had been my home my entire life, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Dad's friends had all distanced themselves after the funeral. Apparently, Beverly had been spreading rumors about my mental instability for weeks. I took a bus to downtown Los Angeles with the little cash I had in my wallet. The city had never seemed so big, so cold, so unforgiving. I'd lived a privileged life, sheltered from the harsh realities that most people face. I had no idea how to survive on the streets. That first night, I slept in a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of coffee until the manager kicked me out at dawn. The second night, I found a women's shelter. The third night, another shelter. Each day, I searched for work. But who wants to hire someone with no address, no references, and a story that sounds completely insane? My stepmother stole my inheritance and kicked me out. Yeah, that goes over real well in job interviews. But even in those dark early days, walking the streets of Law with everything I owned in a backpack, I held on to something Dad had taught me. Your character isn't defined by what happens to you, but by how you respond to what happens to you. I had no idea that in just 2 months, a simple leather wallet would change everything. I had no idea that my story was just beginning, not ending. All I knew was that I had to survive. I had to find a way to prove who I really was and reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. I just never imagined how complicated that journey would become, or how much my heart would have to break before it could truly heal. The thing about living on the streets is that it strips away every illusion you've ever had about yourself. You think you know who you are until you're digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant, fighting back tears as you search for something, anything, edible. 2 months. That's how long I survived in what I can only describe as my own personal hell. 2 months of sleeping in shelters when I could get a bed, in doorways when I couldn't. 2 months of learning that pride is a luxury you can't afford when you're hungry. I remember my first week vividly. I still had this naive belief that someone would help me, that the system would work, that justice would prevail. I went to legal aid offices, tried to explain my situation to lawyers who looked at me like I was delusional, without money for a decent attorney, without any proof of my identity beyond what Beverly's people claimed were forged documents. I was just another crazy person with an unbelievable story. "Listen, honey," one overworked public defender told me, "even if your story is true, proving it would take years and cost more money than you'll ever see. My advice, move on with your life. Move on." As if 23 years of my life could just be erased and forgotten. The shelters were an education in themselves. The first night, I couldn't sleep at all. The woman in the bunk next to me coughed all night. A wet, rattling cough that made my chest hurt just listening to it. The smell was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies. Disinfectant. Despair. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about my old bedroom with its Egyptian cotton sheets and down pillows, and I felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. But you adapt. That's what humans do. We adapt. By the second week, I'd learned the unspoken rules. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with the wrong people. Always carry your belongings with you because they'll disappear if you don't. I learned which shelters had the best food, which ones felt safest, which ones you avoided at all costs. The hunger was the worst part. Not just physical hunger, though that was bad enough. It was the hunger for my old life, for dignity, for the simple comfort of knowing where I'd sleep each night. I'd walk past restaurants and smell the food cooking, and my stomach would cramp so badly I'd have to sit down on the sidewalk and breathe through it. That's how I started collecting cans and bottles. It wasn't much money, a few dollars a day if I was lucky, but it was something. It was a way to feel like I had some control, some purpose. I developed routes through the city, learned which neighborhoods threw away the most recyclables, which dumpsters were worth checking. I'll never forget the morning I saw my reflection in a storefront window and didn't recognize myself. My hair, which had always been my pride, was stringy and dull. My clothes, the same ones I'd been wearing for days, hung loose on my shrinking frame. But it was my eyes that shocked me the most. They looked hollow, Defeated, I stared at that reflection and thought, who is this person? What happened to Hope Matthews? The nights were the hardest, in the shelters, surrounded by other broken people. I'd lie awake and replay my life, searching for clues I'd missed. Had Beverly been planning this all along? Had she somehow caused Dad's accident? The thoughts would spiral until I felt like I was losing my mind. Some nights, when I couldn't get into a shelter, I'd sleep in Pershing Square or under freeway overpasses. The city never really sleeps, and neither do you when you're on the streets. There's always someone walking by, always some danger lurking just out of sight. I learned to sleep with one eye open, clutching my backpack like a lifeline. I met other people living on the streets, each with their own tragic story. There was Maria, a former nurse who'd lost everything to medical bills when her daughter got cancer. There was Frank, a veteran who couldn't find work after coming back from Afghanistan. Their stories reminded me that anyone can fall, that the line between having a home and losing everything is thinner than most people realize. But it was during my 6th week on the streets that I hit my absolute lowest point. I'd been sick for days with what I think was the flu, burning with fever and barely able to stand. I couldn't keep food down, couldn't think straight. I remember sitting on a bench in MacArthur Park one night, shivering despite the warm Los Angeles evening, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered giving up. I thought about Dad, about how disappointed he'd be to see me like this. I thought about just walking into traffic, ending the pain and humiliation. What was the point of fighting for a life that had been stolen from me? What was the point of trying to prove I was Hope Matthews, when that person seemed to have ceased to exist? But then I remembered something Dad used to say when I was little and facing problems that seemed insurmountable. Hope, baby, you're stronger than you know. Sometimes we have to go through hell to get to heaven, but the journey makes us who we're meant to be. Sitting on that bench, fever sick and broken, I made myself a promise. I would survive this. I would find a way to reclaim my life. I didn't know how, but I would not let Beverly win. I would not let my father's memory be tainted by her lies. That night, I found a church that let me sleep in their basement. The pastor, an elderly man with kind eyes, gave me soup and asked no questions. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, and I dreamed of Dad. In the dream, he was standing in his jewelry store, holding up a beautiful necklace to catch the light. Every stone has to be cut and polished before it can shine, he said in the dream. The process is painful, but it reveals the true beauty hidden inside. I woke up with tears on my cheeks, but something else too, determination. I was going to make it through this. Somehow, some way, I was going to find my way back to the light. I had no idea that morning, as I walked through the financial district looking for recyclables, that my darkest days were almost over. I had no idea that a simple leather wallet was about to change everything. September 15th. I remember the date because it was exactly 2 months since Beverly had thrown me out of my own home. The morning was unusually cold for Los Angeles, with a gray fog rolling in from the ocean that made everything look muted and dreamlike. I'd spent the night at St. Vincent's shelter, and I was walking through the financial district with my usual route in mind, checking trash bins and looking for recyclables that might earn me enough for a decent meal. My stomach was cramping from hunger. I'd had nothing but a stale donut and black coffee from the shelter that morning, and even that small bit of food felt like a luxury. I was wearing the same jeans I'd been wearing for 3 days straight, and my sneakers had holes in them that let in every puddle and piece of gravel. I was bent over, rifling through a recycling bin outside a Starbucks. When I saw it, there, lying on the wet pavement next to a gleaming black Mercedes, was a wallet. Not just any wallet. This was beautiful Italian leather, the kind of craftsmanship that Dad would have appreciated. It looked completely out of place on the dirty sidewalk, like a diamond thrown in the mud. I glanced around nervously. The street was busy with morning commuters rushing to their offices, everyone too absorbed in their phones and coffee to notice a homeless girl picking through trash. The Mercedes was empty, its owner probably already inside one of the towering office buildings. My hands were shaking as I picked up the wallet. It was heavy, substantial. Rich people problems, I thought bitterly. Someone was probably already calling their bank to cancel credit cards. More annoyed than worried about the cash inside, I almost walked away. I almost just left it there on the sidewalk for someone else to find. but something made me open it, and when I did, my heart nearly stopped. The driver's license showed a man with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair, Alexander Sterling Hayes. Even living on the streets, I knew that name. Everyone in Los Angeles knew that name. He was one of the most powerful textile magnates in the country, the kind of man who appeared on the covers of business magazines and lived in a world so far removed from mine that we might as well have been from different planets. But it wasn't just the name that made my hands tremble. It was what else was inside that wallet. There had to be at least $3,000 in cash, maybe more. Credit cards with names I recognized. American Express Black. Exclusive banking cards that required millions in assets just to qualify. There were business cards, security access codes written on small pieces of paper, and what looked like confidential company documents. $3,000. That was more money than I'd seen in months. That was enough to get a hotel room, buy decent clothes, eat real food for weeks. It was enough to maybe, just maybe, get back on my feet. I sat down on the curb, clutching the wallet against my chest, and for a moment I let myself imagine what that money could do. I could get cleaned up, look presentable enough to find work. I could stop sleeping in shelters and doorways. I could stop digging through trash for bottles and cans. But then I heard Dad's voice in my head, as clear as if he were sitting right next to me on that grimy curb. "Hope, baby. Your integrity is the only thing nobody can ever take away from you. Not unless you give it away yourself." Dad had built his entire business on trust and honesty. When customers came to Matthew's jewelry, they knew they were getting exactly what they paid for. No inflated appraisals, no hidden flaws, no lies. He'd turned down deals that would have made him millions because they would have required him to compromise his principles. "Honesty is worth more than gold," he used to say, "because once you lose people's trust, all the money in the world won't buy it back." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The smart thing, the survival thing, would be to take the cash and throw the wallet in a dumpster. Who would ever know? Alexander Sterling Hayes probably spent more on lunch than I'd seen in 2 months. This money wouldn't even register as a loss to him. But I would know, and Dad would know. Wherever he was, I stood up, wallet still clutched in my hands, and made the decision that would change everything. I was going to return it, all of it. I was going to find Alexander Sterling Hayes and give back every single dollar, every card, every piece of paper. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me. "You're being an idiot," it said. "You're homeless and hungry, and you're going to give away $3,000 to a man who won't even notice it's gone." But there was something deeper than rational thought driving me. It was the need to hold on to the person Dad had raised me to be. Even if I'd lost everything else, I found the address on one of the business cards and used the last few dollars I had to take a bus to Beverly Hills. The Sterling Hayes estate was exactly what I'd expected. Massive iron gates, perfectly manicured grounds, the kind of house that appeared in architectural magazines. It was the kind of place I'd grown up in. Before my world collapsed, I walked up to the security gate, very aware of how I must look. My hair was dirty and pulled back in a messy ponytail. My clothes were wrinkled and stained. I probably smelled like the shelter and the streets. The security guard looked at me like I was something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. "I need to speak with Mr. Sterling Hayes," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It's about something he lost. Mr. Sterling Hayes doesn't see visitors without appointments," the guard replied dismissively. "Especially not—" He gestured vaguely at my appearance. "Please," I said. "I found his wallet. I just want to return it." The guard's expression shifted slightly, but he was still skeptical. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into his booth to make a phone call. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, clutching the wallet and fighting the urge to run. What was I doing? This was crazy. I should have just mailed the wallet back or dropped it off at a police station. That's when I heard a voice behind me, cultured, elegant, with just a hint of a southern accent. "Excuse me, dear. Are you Hope Morrison?" I turned around to see an older woman emerging from what looked like a garden path. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair perfectly styled and wearing clothes that cost more than most people's cars. Despite her obvious wealth, there was something warm and approachable about her face. No, I'm not," I started to say, but she cut me off. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, walking toward me with a relieved smile. "I'm Eleanor Sterling Hayes, Alexander's mother. You have no idea how desperately we need someone reliable. The last girl quit yesterday without any notice. And I have a charity event this weekend that requires everything to be perfect." I stared at her, completely confused. "I think there's been a mistake." "Nonsense," Eleanor said briskly. "The agency said you'd be here this morning, and here you are. You look exactly like what I was hoping for. Young, presentable, and clearly in need of work." She paused, taking in my disheveled appearance. "Though we'll need to get you some proper uniforms, of course." And that's when it hit me. She thought I was the new housekeeper, Hope Morrison. The woman she was expecting had the same first name as me, and Eleanor had simply assumed I was her. I opened my mouth to correct her, to explain that I was just there to return a wallet. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the kindness in her eyes. Or maybe it was the desperate realization that this might be my only chance to escape the streets. Or maybe it was something deeper. A sense that this moment, this case of mistaken identity, was exactly what Dad would have called divine intervention. The position includes room and board. "Of course," Eleanor continued. "I do hope that works for you. We've had such trouble finding good help lately. Room and board, a place to sleep that wasn't a shelter, regular meals, the chance to be clean again, to feel human again. I started, still clutching Alexander's wallet in my hands. Yes, that would be perfect." Eleanor led me through gardens that looked like something out of a fairy tale, past fountains and perfectly trimmed hedges, toward a mansion that took my breath away. The Sterling Hayes estate was even more impressive up close, all soaring columns and gleaming windows that reflected the California sun like diamonds. "You'll have your own room in the staff quarters," Eleanor was saying as we walked. "It's quite comfortable, with a private bathroom and everything you'll need. Mrs. Chen, our cook, will show you around the kitchen, and I'll give you a full tour of the house tomorrow." I nodded, still in shock that this was actually happening. The wallet felt like it was burning a hole in my hand. I kept thinking I should tell her the truth, that I wasn't Hope Morrison, that I was just a homeless girl trying to return her son's wallet. But every time I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was survival instinct. All I knew was that I hadn't slept in a real bed or taken a hot shower in 2 months, and the thought of walking back out those gates to return to the streets made my chest tight with panic. "You're very quiet, dear," Eleanor observed as we reached a side entrance to the house. "I hope you're not having second thoughts." "No," I said quickly. "No second thoughts. I'm just grateful for the opportunity." She smiled warmly. "Good. I have a feeling you're going to work out perfectly." The staff quarters were nicer than most apartments I'd seen. My room had a comfortable double bed with crisp white linens, a small sitting area with a window overlooking the gardens, and a bathroom that was bigger than the shelter sleeping areas I'd been staying in. When Eleanor left me to get settled, I just stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Afraid to touch anything, I hid Alexander's wallet in the nightstand drawer, telling myself I'd find a way to return it soon. Maybe I could slip it into his study or leave it somewhere he'd find it naturally. I just needed a few days to figure out my next move, to get back on my feet. That first night, I took the longest shower of my life. I must have stood under that hot water for 45 minutes, washing away 2 months of street grime and despair. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror afterward, I barely recognized the person staring back. Clean hair, clean skin, wearing the simple uniform Eleanor had provided. I looked almost like my old self again, but the guilt was eating me alive. Every time someone called me Hope Morrison, I felt like a fraud. Mrs. Chen, the cook, was so sweet to me, showing me around the kitchen and explaining my duties. The other staff members, there was James the gardener, Maria the head housekeeper, and Thomas the driver, all welcomed me warmly. They had no idea they were being kind to a complete stranger who was living a lie. My plan was to stay just long enough to get back on my feet, maybe save a little money and then figure out how to reclaim my real life. I told myself it was temporary, just a few weeks at most. Then I met Alexander. It was my 3rd morning at the estate. I was in the library, dusting the shelves and trying not to gawk at the incredible collection of books. The morning light was streaming through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the Persian rugs. And for a moment, I felt almost peaceful. "You're new!" The voice startled me so much I nearly dropped the feather duster. I spun around to find a man standing in the doorway, and my heart literally skipped a beat. It was him, Alexander Sterling Hayes. But seeing him in person was nothing like seeing his photo on a driver's license. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and the most intense brown eyes I'd ever seen. He was wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dark pants, like he'd been working despite the early hour. But it wasn't just his looks that struck me. It was something in his expression, a kind of guarded weariness that I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror. "Yes, sir," I managed to say. "I'm Hope Morrison. I started a few days ago." He studied me for a moment, and I felt like he was seeing right through me. Could he tell I was lying? Did I look as terrified as I felt? "You're different from the others," he said finally. "Different how?" "Most of the staff won't make eye contact. You're looking right at me like you're not afraid of me." I didn't know what to say to that. The truth was, I wasn't afraid of him. I should have been. He was my employer, a man with enough power to destroy my life with a phone call. But when I looked at him, all I saw was someone who seemed as lonely as I felt. "Should I be afraid of you?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. For a moment, his expression softened, and I saw something that might have been surprise. "Most people are. I'm not most people." We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, and I felt something shift in the air between us. It was like recognition, but not of faces. Recognition of souls, maybe. Of two people who had been hurt and were trying to figure out how to trust again. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding toward the book I'd been dusting around. I looked down and felt my cheeks burn. It was a first edition of Pride and Prejudice. I'd been so absorbed in looking at it that I'd forgotten to actually dust it. "Oh, I wasn't reading," I said quickly. "I was just—" "It's okay," he said, moving closer. "Do you like Austen?" This was dangerous territory. Hope Morrison, the housekeeper, probably didn't spend her free time reading classic literature, but I couldn't help myself. "I love her work," I admitted. "The way she writes about society, about the masks people wear. It feels true even now." Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting perspective from someone who—" He paused, like he was reconsidering his words. "From someone who cleans houses for a living," I finished for him. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," I said. "I know how it looks, but my father always said that education is something nobody can take away from you. No matter what else you lose." I realized too late that I'd said too much. Alexander was studying me with even more intensity now, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. The past tense slipped out without thinking, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Was. He died recently," I said quietly. "Car accident." The lie came so easily, wrapped around just enough truth to feel believable. Alexander's expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." We stood there in the dappled sunlight, surrounded by thousands of books, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a connection to another human being. It was dangerous and wonderful and absolutely terrifying. "I should let you get back to work," Alexander said finally, but he didn't move toward the door. "Yes, sir. Alexander," he corrected. "When it's just us, call me Alexander." After he left, I sank into one of the leather reading chairs and put my head in my hands. What was I doing? I was supposed to be keeping my head down, staying invisible until I could figure out my next move. I wasn't supposed to be having conversations about Jane Austen with my fake employer. I wasn't supposed to be feeling this flutter in my chest every time he looked at me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the wallet in the nightstand drawer. I could still return it. I told myself I could slip it into his study tomorrow and he'd never know I'd had it. But something was changing, something I hadn't expected and couldn't control. I was starting to care about what Alexander Sterling Hayes thought of me, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The next 3 weeks at the Sterling Hayes estate passed like a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Every morning, I'd open my eyes in that beautiful room and for just a moment forget everything that had brought me there. Then reality would crash back. The wallet in my nightstand. The lie I was living. the growing feelings I couldn't control. Alexander had a routine that I learned by heart without meaning to. He'd wake up before dawn and work out in the private gym. Then he'd have coffee in the study while reading financial reports. By 8, he'd usually be in meetings or conference calls that lasted most of the day. But somehow, our paths kept crossing in ways that felt too natural to be coincidence. The library became our unofficial meeting place. I'd be dusting or organizing, and he'd appear in the doorway like he was looking for something. We'd end up talking about books, current events, sometimes just random thoughts about life. I treasured those conversations more than I should have. "You know," he said one morning, finding me rearranging a shelf of philosophy books. Most people would organize these alphabetically. I paused, realizing I'd been sorting them chronologically by publication date without thinking about it. "Oh, sorry. I can change it." "Don't," he said quickly. "I like it this way. It tells a story, seeing how ideas evolved over time." The way he looked at me when he said that made my heart race. There was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even admiration, that I'd never seen before. "That's exactly what I was thinking," I admitted. "Of course you were." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "You continue to surprise me, Hope Morrison." Every time he said that name, I felt like I was being stabbed. The guilt was becoming unbearable, but I was trapped by my own deception. How do you tell someone you're falling for that everything they know about you is a lie? Because I was falling for him. Hard, despite every rational thought telling me it was impossible, despite knowing it could only end in disaster. I was completely and hopelessly falling in love with Alexander Sterling Hayes. It started with the small things. The way he'd automatically hand me books from high shelves when he saw me struggling. How he'd ask Mrs. Chen to make sure I was eating enough, thinking I didn't notice. The morning I found a rare edition of Jane Eyre on my cleaning cart with a note that just said, "Thought you might enjoy this." But it was more than kindness. There was something between us, an electricity that made the air feel charged whenever we were in the same room. I'd catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the intensity in his gaze made me forget how to breathe. Eleanor noticed too. "That boy hasn't smiled this much in years," she told me one afternoon as we arranged flowers in the main hall. "You're good for him, dear." If only she knew the truth. The breakthrough moment came during a thunderstorm in my 3rd week there. It was one of those rare Los Angeles storms that turns the whole city dramatic. Sheets of rain against the windows, thunder that shakes the walls, lightning that illuminates everything in stark black and white. I was working late in the conservatory, polishing the grand piano. When the power went out, the house plunged into darkness, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Hope, are you okay?" Alexander's voice called out. "I'm here," I called back, and moments later, I saw the glow of his phone's flashlight. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked, moving closer. "No," I said. "Actually, I love them. They make everything feel possible, like the whole world could change in an instant." He was quiet for a moment, and in the dim light, I could see him studying my face. "You're not like anyone I've ever met." "Is that good or bad?" "It's terrifying," he said softly. We were standing so close I could smell his cologne, could see the way the lightning reflected in his eyes. The air between us felt electric, charged with more than just the storm. "Why terrifying?" I whispered. "Because I swore I'd never let anyone get close enough to hurt me again." That's when I learned about Victoria. In the darkness of that conservatory, with rain pounding against the glass, Alexander told me about the woman who'd broken his heart 3 years earlier, how she'd left him at the altar, how she'd betrayed him with his best friend and business partner, how she'd nearly destroyed everything he'd built. "I trusted her completely," he said, his voice raw with old pain. "I thought she loved me, but she was just using me. She took confidential information about our company and used it to help Ryan start a competing business. When I found out, they were already living together in Europe, spending money they'd made by betraying me. My heart broke for him. No wonder he seemed so guarded, so careful about letting people close. "I'm sorry," I said. "She was an idiot to give up someone like you." He looked at me sharply. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," I said. "I know you're kind to your employees. I know you care about your mother. I know you read poetry even though you try to hide it. I'd seen the book of Neruda sonnets on his nightstand when I'd cleaned his room. I know you're nothing like the cold businessman everyone thinks you are. How can you see that when no one else does? Maybe because I know what it's like to have people judge you based on appearances instead of who you really are. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with more truth than he could possibly know. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, and I saw something shift in his expression. Hope, he said quietly, and the way he said my name, or the name he thought was mine, made my knees weak. Yes, I'm going to do something that's probably a terrible idea. Before I could ask what he meant, his hands were cupping my face, and his lips were on mine. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, like he was giving me a chance to pull away, but I melted into him instead, my hands fisting in his shirt as I kissed him back with 3 weeks' worth of suppressed longing. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the conservatory, everything felt perfectly still and quiet. That was definitely a terrible idea, I whispered against his lips. The worst, he agreed, but he was smiling as he said it. We stood there holding each other until the power came back on, flooding the room with warm light. In that brightness, reality crashed back over me like a wave. What was I doing? I was kissing a man who didn't even know my real name, a man whose wallet I'd been hiding for weeks. I should go, I said, stepping back reluctantly. Early morning tomorrow. Hope, he called as I reached the door. This doesn't have to change anything. If you're not comfortable. It's not about comfort, I said, turning back to look at him. It's about the fact that some things are too good to be true. I left him standing there in the conservatory, surrounded by his mother's orchids and the lingering scent of rain. In my room, I sat on the bed and stared at the wallet in my nightstand drawer. The guilt was eating me alive, but now it was mixed with something even more painful, the knowledge that I was falling in love with a man who could never love me back. Not if he knew who I really was. 2 more weeks passed in a haze of stolen moments and growing feelings. Alexander and I found excuses to be near each other, conversations that lasted longer than they should have, touches that lingered just a moment too long. But I could see the internal battle in his eyes. He was fighting his feelings as hard as I was fighting mine. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was cleaning Alexander's study when I overheard him on a phone call that made my blood run cold. I need to find whoever has those documents, he was saying. Someone's been using them to access confidential information. If this gets out, it could destroy everything we've rebuilt since Victoria. He was talking about his wallet, the documents inside it. Someone was using copies to blackmail him, and he had no idea that the originals were sitting in my nightstand drawer, that the person he was desperately searching for was the woman he'd been kissing in thunderstorms. That night, I made a decision. I would tell him everything the next morning. I would give him back his wallet, confess who I really was, and accept whatever consequences came with the truth. I had no idea that by morning, it would be too late. I had no idea that 2 women from our past were about to collide with our present and destroy everything we'd built together. I woke up that morning with a strange sense of dread, like my subconscious knew something terrible was coming before my rational mind caught up. It was a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks since I'd arrived at the Sterling Hayes estate, and I'd planned to tell Alexander everything that day. I'd rehearsed the words 100 times in my head. I need to tell you something about who I really am. But first, I had to get through breakfast service and the morning routine. Eleanor had guests coming for lunch, some charity board meeting, and she wanted everything perfect. I was arranging flowers in the main foyer when I heard an unfamiliar voice in the entrance hall. "Eleanor, darling, you look absolutely radiant." The voice was sophisticated, melodious, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. I peeked around the corner and saw a stunning woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes. Wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, she was embracing Eleanor like they were old friends. But something about the interaction felt forced, theatrical. "Victoria," Eleanor said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "I wasn't expecting you." Victoria. My blood ran cold. This was her, Alexander's ex-fiancée, the woman who'd betrayed him and broken his heart, the woman he'd told me about during that thunderstorm, when he'd opened up to me in the darkness of the conservatory. I ducked back behind the flower arrangement, my heart pounding. What was she doing here? Why now? I know it's unexpected, Victoria was saying. "But I'm back in Los Angeles, and I couldn't leave without seeing you. You were always so kind to me. Eleanor, I've missed you terribly." I could practically hear Eleanor's internal struggle. She was too polite to throw Victoria out, but I could tell from her tone that she wasn't exactly thrilled by this surprise visit. "Would you like some tea?" Eleanor asked finally. Ever the gracious hostess. "That would be lovely. Is Alexander home? I was hoping we could talk." "He's in meetings all morning," Eleanor said carefully. "Perhaps it's better if—" "Oh, that's fine. I can wait. We have so much to catch up on." I stayed hidden until they'd moved to the sitting room, then quickly finished the flower arrangement and hurried to find Mrs. Chen in the kitchen. I needed to know what was happening, but I couldn't exactly ask directly without seeming nosy. "Mrs. Chen," I said as casually as I could manage. "Eleanor mentioned she might need extra tea service today, Mrs." Chen looked up from her prep work, her expression troubled. "Yes, dear. We have an unexpected guest, Victoria Campbell. Well, I suppose she goes by Victoria Sterling Hayes now, though that marriage didn't last long. She was married to Mr. Alexander?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Oh no, dear. She married some European businessman after she left Mr. Alexander at the altar. Lasted about a year from what I heard. Now she's back, claiming she wants to make amends." Mrs. Chen's tone made it clear what she thought of that idea. I spent the rest of the morning in a state of anxiety, jumping every time I heard footsteps in the hallway. Victoria was here, in Alexander's house, waiting to talk to him. What did she want? Was she trying to win him back? Around noon, I was dusting in the hallway near Alexander's study when I heard his voice. He'd finished his meetings and was heading toward the sitting room where Victoria waited. I know I should have minded my own business, but I couldn't help myself. I crept closer to the doorway, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Victoria?" Alexander's voice was cold, controlled. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Alex." Her voice was soft, vulnerable, completely different from the confident tone she'd used with Eleanor. "You look well. What do you want? Can't I just want to see you? To apologize for how things ended between us?" There was a long pause. I held my breath, straining to hear. 3 years, Alexander said finally. 3 years of silence, and now you show up at my mother's house uninvited, so I'll ask again. What do you want? "I made a mistake, Alex. The biggest mistake of my life. Ryan and it was never real. I was confused, scared of commitment, and I made a horrible decision that I've regretted every day since." My chest felt tight listening to this. She sounded so sincere, so broken. What if Alexander believed her? What if he still loved her? "You didn't just leave me, Victoria. You stole from me. You gave confidential information to Ryan that nearly destroyed my company. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was young and stupid, and now you're older and desperate," Alexander interrupted. "I heard about your divorce, about the bankruptcy. Is that what this is really about? You need money. That's not fair." Victoria's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Yes, things have been difficult, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I never stopped loving you, Alex. Because I want to try to make things right between us." I couldn't listen anymore. I stumbled away from the doorway, my vision blurring with tears I had no right to shed. Victoria was beautiful, sophisticated, from Alexander's world in a way I could never be. And despite everything she'd done, there had been love between them once. Real love, the kind that leaves scars when it's torn away. I made it to my room and closed the door before the tears really started. What had I been thinking? That a man like Alexander Sterling Hayes could actually fall for his housekeeper? That what we had was real, lasting, worth building a future on? I was living a lie, and lies always catch up to you eventually. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I searched for news about Beverly. What I found made my blood run cold. There she was on the entertainment news websites, playing the role of grieving widow perfectly. She'd given interviews about how her troubled stepdaughter had disappeared after Richard's death, how she was desperately worried, and had hired private investigators to find me. But it was the financial news that really scared me. Beverly was selling off Dad's jewelry stores one by one. The empire he'd spent his life building was being dismantled piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it because I legally didn't exist. I was so absorbed in the articles, that I almost didn't hear the knock on my door. "Hope, are you all right?" Alexander's voice came through the wood, concerned. I quickly wiped my eyes and opened the door. He was standing there looking tired and stressed. His hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just taking a break." He studied my face, and I knew he could see I'd been crying. "Victoria's gone," he said quietly. "Oh," I didn't know what else to say. She wanted me to take her back. Said she'd made a mistake, that she never stopped loving me. Each word felt like a knife in my chest. "And what did you tell her?" Alexander stepped into my room and closed the door behind him. "I told her that people don't get to destroy your life and then walk back into it whenever it's convenient for them." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. I was relieved that he'd rejected Victoria, but wasn't I doing exactly what she'd done? Lying to him, deceiving him, living under false pretenses. "Hope," he said, moving closer. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I whispered. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears I didn't realize were still falling. "Talk to me. What's going on?" This was it. This was the moment I should tell him everything. About the wallet. About who I really was. About Beverly and the stolen inheritance. About how I'd been living a lie since the moment I walked through his gates. "Alexander, I need to tell you something." But before I could finish, his phone rang. He glanced at it and frowned. "I have to take this," he said apologetically. "It's my lawyer. But don't go anywhere, okay? We need to talk." After he left, I sat on my bed and stared at the wallet in my nightstand drawer. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow I'd tell him everything. Return his wallet, and accept whatever consequences came with the truth. I had no idea that Victoria hadn't really left. I had no idea that she'd spent the afternoon making phone calls, hiring private investigators, digging into the background of the mysterious new housekeeper who seemed to have captured Alexander's attention. And I definitely had no idea that somewhere in Los Angeles, Beverly was getting very interesting information about my current whereabouts. The ghosts of our pasts were circling, and they were about to collide in ways that would destroy everything Alexander and I had built together. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night as I rehearsed what I was going to tell Alexander. Today was the day I'd come clean about everything. The wallet, my real identity, the lies I'd been living. I couldn't keep deceiving him, especially not after seeing how much Victoria's betrayal had hurt him. I was getting dressed when I heard voices outside my window. Urgent, hushed conversation coming from the gardens. I peeked through the curtains and my blood turned to ice. Victoria was there, talking to a woman I'd never seen before. But even from a distance, something about the stranger's posture, the way she moved, seemed familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language screamed conspiracy. Victoria kept gesturing toward the house while the other woman nodded and took notes. They looked like they were planning something, and every instinct I had told me it involved me. I tried to push the paranoia away as I went about my morning duties. Maybe I was seeing danger where none existed. Maybe Victoria really had left yesterday and this was just someone else. Maybe a friend of Eleanor's I hadn't met yet, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger as the day went on. Around noon, I was polishing silver in the dining room when Mrs. Chen hurried in, looking flustered. "Hope, dear, there are some people here to see you," she said. "They're waiting in the front parlor with Mrs. Sterling Hayes." My heart stopped. People? What kind of people? "I'm not sure, dear. A woman and a man in suits. They said it was important." I felt like I was going to be sick. With shaking hands, I set down the silver polish and followed Mrs. Chen toward the front of the house. Each step felt like I was walking toward my own execution. Eleanor was in the parlor with 3 people I'd never seen before. 2 men in expensive suits, and a woman with short blonde hair and cold blue eyes. They all turned to look at me when I entered, and I saw recognition flash across the woman's face. "Hope Morrison?" one of the men asked. "Yes," I whispered, though the name felt like ash in my mouth. "I'm Detective Harrison with the LAPD, and this is Detective Rodriguez. This is Mrs. Campbell, a private investigator. We need to ask you some questions." Private investigator? My mind was racing. Victoria must have hired her to look into my background, but what could she have possibly found? I'd been so careful to keep my real identity hidden. Questions about what? Eleanor asked, looking confused and concerned. The female detective, Rodriguez, I think she said, opened a folder and pulled out several photographs. My heart nearly stopped when I saw what they were. Pictures of me, not recent ones, but photos from my old life, at charity galas with Dad, at the jewelry store, in the society pages of magazines, in every single one. I was identified as Hope Matthews, daughter of Richard Matthews, Ms. Morrison. Detective Harrison said, "Can you explain why we have multiple photographs of you identified as Hope Matthews?" The missing heiress whose stepmother reported her disappeared 3 months ago. The room started spinning. I gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling over. I don't understand. Beverly Matthews has been looking for you everywhere, the private investigator said, her voice sharp with accusation. She's been worried sick about her stepdaughter's mental state. She told us you've been unstable since your father's death, that you've been living in delusions, sometimes believing you're other people. That's not true, I said desperately. Beverly is lying. She's the one who what? Detective Rodriguez interrupted. Who's been taking care of your father's business empire while you've been missing? Who's been handling his affairs because you disappeared without a trace? I looked at Eleanor, whose face had gone pale. Hope, dear, what are they talking about? Who is Hope Matthews? I whispered. I'm Hope Matthews. I'm not Hope Morrison. I never was. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the confusion and hurt spreading across Eleanor's face as she processed what I'd just admitted. So you've been lying about your identity, Detective Harrison said. Living under false pretenses. Working in this house under a stolen name. It's not like that, I said. But even to my own ears, it sounded weak. Ms. Sterling Hayes, the private investigator addressed Eleanor. I'm afraid it gets worse. We have reason to believe that Ms. Matthews has been stealing from your family. What? Eleanor and I said at the same time. Rodriguez pulled out another folder, this one filled with photocopied documents that made my heart stop completely. They were copies of the papers from Alexander's wallet, the confidential business documents, the security codes, everything. These documents were found in Ms. Matthews' possession, Rodriguez said. They contain highly sensitive information about Sterling Hayes Industries. We believe she's been using them for corporate espionage or blackmail. That's impossible, Eleanor said, but her voice was shaking. Hope would never... Where did you get those? I demanded, staring at the copies. I'd never made copies of anything. The original documents were still hidden in my room. Ms. Campbell found them during her investigation, Harrison said, along with evidence that you've been using the name Hope Morrison to infiltrate wealthy households. This appears to be a pattern of behavior. I felt like I was drowning. None of this made sense. How could they have copies of documents that I'd never copied? How could they claim I'd done this before when I'd never even heard of Hope Morrison, until Eleanor mistook me for her? This is insane, I said. I found those documents. I've been trying to return them. I never copied them, never used them for anything. Then why didn't you return them immediately? Rodriguez asked. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain without sounding even more guilty? How could I tell them that I'd kept the wallet because I was afraid to reveal my real identity? That I'd fallen in love with the man I was supposed to be working for? That's when Alexander walked in. Mother? What's going on, Mrs.? Chen said there were police. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me standing there with tears streaming down my face, surrounded by detectives and documents spread across the coffee table. Alexander, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is Hope Matthews, not Hope Morrison. She's been lying to us about who she is. I watched Alexander's face change as he processed what his mother had said. First confusion, then recognition as he remembered the name from news reports about the missing heiress, then something that looked like betrayal. And these documents, Detective Harrison continued, holding up the photocopied papers, contain confidential information about your company. Ms. Matthews has been living in your house under false pretenses while in possession of materials that could be used to damage Sterling Hayes Industries. Alexander's eyes met mine across the room, and what I saw there broke my heart completely. It was the same look he'd described seeing in Victoria's eyes the day she betrayed him. Cold, calculating, false. "Where are the originals?" he asked quietly. "Mr. Sterling Hayes," Rodriguez said. "We'll need to search Ms. Matthews' room and belongings, if you could show us." "I'll show you," Alexander said, his voice like ice, as we walked toward the staff quarters. I tried desperately to explain. "Alexander, please listen to me. I can't explain everything. I found your wallet. I was trying to return it. My wallet." He stopped walking and turned to face me. "You've had my wallet this whole time." "Yes, but not for the reasons they're saying. I found it on the street. I brought it here to return it to you. But then your mother thought I was the new housekeeper and you decided to steal my identity and infiltrate my house. No, it wasn't like that. I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. And when she offered me the job, I thought I could figure out how to return your wallet and then leave. But you didn't leave," he said. "You stayed for weeks, living a lie, sleeping under my roof, letting me—" He stopped himself, but I knew what he'd been about to say. "Letting me fall in love with you." We reached my room and I opened the nightstand drawer with shaking hands. The wallet was still there, exactly where I'd hidden it weeks ago. I pulled it out and handed it to Alexander, and for a moment our fingers touched. "The documents are all there," I said quietly. "I never copied them, never used them for anything. I swear to you, Alexander, I was going to tell you everything today. I was going to give this back and explain everything." He opened the wallet and quickly checked the contents. Everything was there, the cash, the cards, the original documents. But instead of relief, his expression grew even colder. "You expect me to believe," he said slowly, "that you've been carrying around $3,000 in cash and never spent a penny of it, that you've had access to confidential company information and never used it, that you just happened to find my wallet and just happened to be mistaken for my new housekeeper." Put like that, it did sound impossible. It sounded exactly like the kind of elaborate con that Victoria might have pulled. "It's the truth," I whispered. "Just like your name was Hope Morrison. Just like your story about your father dying in a car accident. That part was true. My father did die. Beverly killed him and stole my inheritance and—" "Enough." Alexander's voice cut through my words like a blade. "I've heard enough lies for one lifetime." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling Hayes, we'll need you to come down to the station to file a formal complaint about the theft and identity fraud." "No," Alexander said, still looking at me with those cold, disappointed eyes. "I don't want to press charges. I just want her out of my house now." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Mrs. Chen packed my few belongings while I stood there in shock. Eleanor wouldn't even look at me. The private investigator kept taking notes, documenting everything for what I assumed would be a report back to Beverly. As I was escorted toward the front door, I tried one last time. "Alexander, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. Let me tell you what really happened." He finally looked at me, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. "You know what the worst part is, Hope? I actually believed you cared about me. I thought what we had was real. It was real," I said desperately. "Everything I felt for you was real, just like it was real with Victoria," he said quietly. "Just like I was real to her, right up until the moment she destroyed everything." As I walked through those gates for the last time, carrying my pathetic belongings in the same backpack I'd arrived with, I realized that I hadn't just lost my home again. I'd lost the love of my life, and this time, it was my own fault for not having the courage to tell the truth when it mattered. Behind me, I could hear Victoria and the private investigator talking quietly near a black sedan. I caught fragments of their conversation. Something about phase 2 and making sure she doesn't cause any more trouble. Whatever they were planning. I knew it wasn't over. This had been just the beginning. Standing outside those familiar gates with my pathetic backpack, I felt like I was reliving my worst nightmare all over again. 6 weeks ago, I'd walked through those same gates as a desperate, homeless girl with nothing left to lose. Now I was leaving as something worse. A woman who'd lost not just her home and identity, but the love of the only man who'd ever truly seen her soul. The irony was crushing. I'd spent weeks agonizing over how to tell Alexander the truth. And in the end, the truth had been weaponized against me by the very people who'd destroyed my life in the first place. I took the bus back to downtown LA, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. The way Eleanor had looked at me with such disappointment, the cold professionalism of the detectives. But worst of all, the expression on Alexander's face when he realized I'd been lying to him. That moment when I saw him comparing me to Victoria, when I watched all his trust and affection die in his eyes. "You're igualzinha a ela," he'd said in that final moment. "You're just like her." Those words echoed in my head as the bus carried me back to the world I'd tried so hard to escape. I found a cheap motel in a part of town that asked no questions and took cash. The room was a far cry from my beautiful quarters at the Sterling Hayes estate. Stained carpet, a bed that sagged in the middle, walls so thin I could hear every conversation from the neighboring rooms. But it was shelter, and after everything I'd been through, I was grateful for even that. I sat on the edge of that sagging bed and tried to process what had just happened. Someone had copied the documents from Alexander's wallet, documents I'd never even taken out of my room. Someone had built an entire case against me using evidence I'd never created. The setup was so perfect, so detailed, that even I might have believed it if I hadn't been living it. Victoria and Beverly, it had to be them working together. But how had they even found each other? How had they known to look for me at the Sterling Hayes estate? The answer came to me slowly, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The private investigator Victoria had hired to look into my background. She must have discovered my real identity and contacted Beverly, two women who'd been betrayed by the Matthews family. Two women with reason to hate me, joining forces to destroy what little happiness I'd managed to find. It was diabolical, and it was working perfectly. I spent the next few days in a haze of depression and disbelief. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that scene in the parlor over and over in my mind. The way Alexander had looked at me, the way his voice had turned so cold, the way he'd refused to even listen to my explanation. But by the fourth day, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the last remnants of the fighting spirit Dad had instilled in me. But I decided I couldn't just lie down and let them win. I had to do something, even if I had no idea what. I used the last of my cash to buy a newspaper and started looking for work. I couldn't go back to living on the streets, not just because of my pride, but because I was starting to suspect I might not be safe there. If Beverly and Victoria were working together, if they'd gone to all this trouble to discredit me, they weren't going to just let me disappear quietly. That's how I ended up at Meridian Textiles, a factory in East Leigh that manufactured fabrics for clothing companies. It was hot, loud, repetitive work, standing at machines for 12 hours a day, breathing in cotton dust and chemical fumes, my hands constantly moving to keep up with the production quotas. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, working for one of Sterling Hayes Industries' biggest competitors, living under my real name for the first time in months. Hope Matthews, factory worker. It was so far from the life I'd been born into that it felt like some kind of cosmic joke. But the work was honest, and it paid enough for me to rent a tiny studio apartment in a building that had seen better days. For the first time since leaving the Sterling Hayes estate, I had a roof over my head that was truly mine, even if it came with cockroaches and noisy neighbors. It was during my third week at the factory that I started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, I thought it was just stress or the chemicals we worked with, but when the nausea persisted and I missed my period, a terrifying possibility began to form in my mind. I bought a pregnancy test at a drugstore, my hands shaking as I handed over the cash. Back in my tiny bathroom, I waited for results that would either confirm my worst fears or let me move on with trying to rebuild my life. 2 pink lines. I stared at that test for what felt like hours. My mind completely blank. Pregnant. I was pregnant with Alexander's child. The child of a man who thought I was a lying, manipulative criminal. A man who'd thrown me out of his life and wanted nothing to do with me. I don't know how long I sat on my bathroom floor, crying and trying to process this new reality. Part of me was terrified. I was barely surviving as it was, working a minimum wage job and living paycheck to paycheck. How could I possibly raise a child on my own? But another part of me, a part that surprised me with its strength, felt something that might have been joy. This baby was a piece of Alexander, a connection to the only happiness I'd known in months. Whatever else happened, I would love this child completely. I made the decision that night, sitting in my cramped studio apartment with my hand on my still flat stomach. I would have this baby. I would raise him or her to know that their father was a good man who'd been deceived. not a villain who'd abandoned them. And someday, when my child was old enough to understand, I would tell them the whole truth about what had happened. But I wouldn't tell Alexander. How could I? Even if I could get past his security, even if I could convince him to see me, why would he believe that the pregnancy was real and not just another manipulation, after Victoria's betrayal, and then mine? He'd never trust that I wasn't just trying to trap him or get money from him. No, I would do this alone. It wouldn't be easy, but I'd survived worse. Weeks passed in a blur of factory work and morning sickness. I threw myself into the routine, trying not to think about what my life might have been like if things had been different. If I'd told Alexander the truth from the beginning. If Beverly and Victoria hadn't found each other. If. The other workers at the factory were kind to me, in their way. They didn't ask questions about my past or why a girl with my obvious education was working in a textile plant. In this part of the city, everyone had secrets. Everyone was running from something. But even as I tried to build a new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the same black sedan parked across from the factory. Sometimes I'd see a woman with short blonde hair, the private investigator from that horrible day, lingering near my apartment building. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my guilt and fear were making me see threats that weren't there. But deep down, I knew that Beverly and Victoria weren't done with me yet. They'd succeeded in destroying my relationship with Alexander, but that might not be enough for them. Beverly still had my inheritance to protect, and as long as I was alive, I was a threat to her story about the disturbed stepdaughter who'd disappeared. And Victoria. Victoria had seen how much Alexander cared about me, even if he wouldn't admit it now. She might worry that he'd eventually come looking for me, that he'd discover the truth about what had really happened. I was a loose end that needed to be tied up permanently. The realization hit me one evening as I walked home from work, past the usual crowd of commuters and street vendors. If something happened to me, if I had an accident, or simply disappeared, who would even notice? I had no friends here, no family, no one who would ask questions or demand answers. I was completely alone, pregnant, and running out of time to figure out how to protect myself and my unborn child from forces I didn't fully understand, but knew were closing in around me. That night, I wrote a letter I hoped I'd never have to send, telling the whole truth about Beverly, Victoria, and everything that had happened. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Alexander and hid it in the one place I thought it might be safe, just in case. 2 months passed at the factory, and I'd settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wake up at 5, work until 6, come home to my tiny apartment, eat whatever I could keep down, and fall asleep exhausted. The pregnancy was starting to show, just a small bump that I could hide under loose clothing. But every morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw the evidence of the life growing inside me. I'd started talking to the baby during those quiet evening hours. "Hey there, little one," I'd whisper, my hand resting on my stomach. "It's just you and me against the world, but we're going to be okay. I promise we're going to be okay." The morning sickness had mostly passed, replaced by an energy I hadn't felt in months. Maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was the sense of purpose that came with knowing I was responsible for another life. But I felt stronger than I had since this whole nightmare began. I'd even started saving money, just a few dollars from each paycheck, hidden in an old coffee can under my sink. It wasn't much, but it was something, a start toward the future I was trying to build for my child. That's why what happened on December 3rd felt so much more devastating. I wasn't just a broken woman with nothing left to lose anymore. I was a mother-to-be with everything to live for. It was a Friday evening, and I'd just finished my shift. The winter rain had started early this year, turning the streets into rivers of gray water that reflected the neon signs from nearby shops. I was walking home from the bus stop, my head down against the rain, when I heard my name, Hope Matthews. I turned around, startled. A woman was approaching me through the rain, middle-aged, with kind eyes and a worried expression. She looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place her. "I'm sorry," I said, instinctively taking a step back. "Do I know you?" "I'm Sarah Chen," she said. "I used to work for your father. I was his bookkeeper for almost 10 years. My heart stopped. Sarah. I remembered her now. She'd been at Dad's funeral. one of the few employees who'd seemed genuinely devastated by his death. "Sarah," I breathed. "What are you doing here?" "I've been looking for you," she said urgently. "Ever since that woman threw you out of your own house. I tried to find you, but you just disappeared. That woman has my father's lawyers, and the police convinced I'm mentally unstable," I said bitterly. "What was I supposed to do?" "Fight back," Sarah said fiercely. "Hope, I have proof of what she did." My entire world shifted. "What kind of proof?" Sarah glanced around nervously, as if she was afraid we were being watched. "Not here. Can we go somewhere private? What I have to tell you. It's going to change everything." We went to a small diner a few blocks from my apartment. Sarah ordered coffee. I stuck with water, still cautious about what I put in my body. Once we were settled in a corner booth, she pulled out a manila envelope. "After your father died," she said quietly, "Beverly fired me immediately, said the family no longer needed a bookkeeper. But I'd been working on the monthly reports when it happened. I took copies of everything home that night, planning to finish them over the weekend." She opened the envelope and spread several documents across the table. Financial records, emails, phone logs, all bearing the Matthews Jewelry letterhead. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a series of wire transfers. 2 days before your father died, Beverly transferred $2 million from the company's operating account to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. She was stealing from the company. Not just stealing. Look at the dates on these emails. Sarah showed me a series of messages between Beverly and someone called D. Morrison. She'd been planning this for months. She knew about your father's will long before he died. My hands were shaking as I read the emails. They were discussing how to handle the Hope problem and ensure a smooth transition of assets. There were references to forged documents, bribed officials, and something that made my blood run cold. A mention of making the accident look natural. "Sarah," I whispered, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Hope, honey, your father didn't die in an accident. Beverly had his car sabotaged. I found the receipt for the work. She paid someone to tamper with his brake lines." The diner seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting waves of nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "She murdered him," I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. "And she tried to have you declared incompetent so she could control the inheritance until you turned 25. But when that didn't work fast enough, she decided to have you disappear permanently." Sarah pulled out one more document, a contract with the private investigator I'd seen at the Sterling Hayes estate. But this wasn't just for surveillance. It was for something much more sinister. "She hired someone to eliminate you," Sarah said quietly. "Make it look like an accident or a suicide. A troubled young woman who couldn't handle losing her father." I thought about all those times I'd felt like I was being watched. All those glimpses of the black sedan. I hadn't been paranoid. I'd been right. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why didn't you go to the police months ago?" "I tried," Sarah said, "but Beverly had gotten to them first. They wouldn't listen to anything that contradicted the official story. I needed to find you first, to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Sarah's expression became urgent, almost panicked. "Hope, they know where you are. Beverly's people found you at that factory. They've been watching you, waiting for the right moment. I think they're planning to move tonight." My blood turned to ice. "Tonight?" I overheard a phone conversation between Beverly and that investigator. Something about Friday night, after her shift, make it quick and clean. "Hope, you can't go home tonight. You can't go anywhere they might expect you to be." I sat there staring at this woman who'd risked everything to warn me, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling me. My stepmother hadn't just stolen my inheritance and ruined my life. She was a murderer who was planning to kill me and my unborn child. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We go to the FBI," Sarah said. "Federal crimes, interstate money laundering. They'll have to listen. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." We paid for our coffee and hurried out into the rain. Sarah's car was parked a block away, and as we walked toward it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made my heart race. "Sarah," I said as we approached her car, "I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant." She stopped walking and turned to look at me, her expression shifting from surprise to fierce protectiveness. "Then we definitely need to get you out of here now." But as we reached her car, I saw something that made my heart stop. A black sedan was parked across the street, its engine running. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see the silhouette of someone watching us. "Sarah," I said quietly, "don't look, but I think they're already here." She followed my gaze and cursed under her breath. "Get in the car, now." We climbed into her Honda, and Sarah started the engine with shaking hands. But as we pulled away from the curb, the black sedan immediately followed. "They're following us," I said, looking back through the rear window. "I know," Sarah said grimly, pressing harder on the accelerator. "Hold on." What happened next feels like a nightmare I can't quite remember clearly. Sarah trying to lose the sedan in the maze of downtown streets, the screech of tires on wet pavement, the sudden impact that sent our car spinning into a light pole. I remember Sarah screaming my name. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth. I remember crawling out of the wrecked car and seeing the black sedan stopped a few yards away, its driver getting out with something in his hand. I ran, pregnant, injured, terrified. I ran through the rain-soaked streets like my life depended on it, because it did. The last thing I remember clearly is stepping into a crosswalk, thinking I'd made it to safety, thinking I could find help, then headlights. Impossibly bright, coming straight at me at impossible speed. The impact threw me 15 feet. I felt my body hit the pavement, felt something inside me tear and break. Then darkness swallowed everything. I spent the next week floating in and out of consciousness. My dreams filled with images of Alexander, of our baby, of the life we might have had together. Sometimes I thought I heard voices, doctors, nurses, someone reading to me, but it all felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. When I finally woke up fully, truly awake for the first time since the accident, there was a man sitting in the chair beside my hospital bed. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope, thinking it might be Alexander, but as my vision cleared, I realized it was someone else entirely, a stranger with kind eyes and a worried expression. "Ms. Matthews," he said gently, "my name is James Parker. I'm a private investigator, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." "Ms. Matthews," the man said again, leaning forward in his chair. "Can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse appeared beside him and helped me sip some water through a straw. The cool liquid was the most beautiful thing I'd ever tasted. "Who are you?" I finally managed to whisper. "James Parker," he repeated. "I'm a private investigator hired by Alexander Sterling Hayes. He's been looking for you, Hope. He knows the truth now." Those words hit me harder than the car that had put me in this hospital bed. Alexander had been looking for me. He knew the truth. "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. James pulled his chair closer to my bed. "After you left the estate, Alexander couldn't let it go. Something about your story didn't add up for him. He hired me to investigate what really happened. Tears started flowing down my cheeks before I could stop them. But he said I was just like Victoria. He said he never wanted to see me again. He was hurt and confused," James said gently. "But he's a smart man, Hope. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the evidence against you was too perfect, too convenient. So he asked me to dig deeper. What did you find?" James opened a briefcase beside his chair and pulled out several folders. "Everything. The fake documents that were planted in your room. Victoria had copies made weeks before the confrontation. The forged financial records that made it look like you'd stolen money. Even the fake background they created for Hope Morrison." My head was spinning. Victoria did all that. Victoria and Beverly worked together. We have phone records, email exchanges, financial transactions, a complete paper trail of their conspiracy. But Hope, it gets so much worse than what they did to you. He opened another folder and showed me documents that made my blood run cold. Death certificates, autopsy reports, insurance claims, all related to my father's car accident. "Your father was murdered," James said quietly. "Beverly had his brake lines cut by a mechanic she paid off. We found the guy. He's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity." The room started spinning again. Even though Sarah had told me this, hearing it confirmed by an official investigation made it real in a way that was almost unbearable. She killed him for money, I whispered. $200 million, James confirmed. Your father's estate was worth even more than most people knew. Beverly thought she could eliminate both obstacles, your father and you, and walk away with everything. The attack on me was supposed to be your murder, James finished grimly. We have the man who ran you down in custody. He's also agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Beverly hired him to make it look like a hit-and-run accident. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. What about Sarah? Is she okay? Sarah Chen is fine. She's the one who led us to most of this evidence. She's been working with the FBI for weeks, building the case against Beverly. And Victoria, in federal custody. Turns out she'd been running similar cons in Europe before she came back to the States. International fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit murder. She's looking at spending the rest of her life in prison. I lay there in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to absorb everything James had told me. Beverly was in jail. Victoria was in jail. The truth was finally out, but somehow none of it felt real yet. James, I said quietly, you said Alexander knows the truth. Does that mean he's here? James said with a smile. He's been here every day since the accident, waiting for you to wake up. Do you want to see him? My heart started racing so fast, I was afraid the monitors would start beeping. Yes, but I look terrible, and I don't know what to say to him. And, Hope, James interrupted gently. He loves you. That's why he never stopped looking for you. That's why he's been sitting in this hospital for a week, barely sleeping, refusing to leave until you woke up. He loves me, more than life itself. From what I can tell, James left to get Alexander, and I had exactly 3 minutes to try to prepare myself for a conversation I'd dreamed about and dreaded in equal measure. How do you apologize for lying to someone you love? How do you explain that every lie was told to protect them, not hurt them? When Alexander walked into that hospital room, I forgot every word I'd planned to say. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing the same clothes he'd probably slept in for days. But when his eyes met mine, they filled with so much relief and love that I started crying all over again. Hope, he said, rushing to my bedside. God, I thought I'd lost you. Alexander, I'm so sorry, I sobbed. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but I was scared and… Shh, he said, taking my hand in both of his. I know everything now. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I should have listened to you. I should have trusted what I felt in my heart, instead of letting my past cloud my judgment. You had every right not to trust me. I lied to you about who I was. You were protecting yourself from people who were trying to kill you, he said fiercely. You were surviving the only way you knew how. I should have seen that. We sat there for a moment, just holding hands and looking at each other, and I felt something that had been broken inside me start to heal. Alexander, I said quietly, there's something else I need to tell you. Something the doctors probably already mentioned. His expression became concerned. What is it? Are you more seriously injured than they said? No, it's not that. I took a deep breath, my hand moving instinctively to my stomach. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Alexander's eyes went wide, then moved to where my hand rested on my belly, then back to my face. A baby, he whispered. I know it's complicated, and I know this whole situation is crazy, and I don't expect anything from you. He silenced me with a kiss that was soft and desperate and full of so much love that I felt my heart might burst from it. Hope, he said against my lips. Are you seriously trying to tell me that the woman I love is carrying my child and you don't expect anything from me? The woman you love, I whispered. The woman I've loved since the moment I found her reading Jane Austen in my library, he confirmed. The woman I've loved through every lie, every truth, every moment of doubt and certainty. The woman I want to spend the rest of my life making up for the fact that I ever let her walk away, even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. He cupped my face in his hands. Hope, you kept my wallet safe for weeks when you were homeless and desperate. You never spent a penny of my money, never used my information against me, never did anything except try to return what wasn't yours that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. That's when I remembered. With shaking hands, I reached into the drawer of my bedside table and pulled out the letter I'd written, the one I'd addressed to him months ago and had been carrying ever since. I wrote this for you, I said, handing him the envelope. The night before I planned to tell you everything. I wanted you to have it just in case something happened to me. Alexander opened the letter and read it silently. When he finished, his eyes were bright with tears. I found your wallet and your heart on the same day, he read aloud. I hope I can return both when you're ready to receive them. With all my love, your Hope. I signed it, your Hope, because that's how I felt, I said quietly, like I belonged to you, even though I had no right to feel that way. You do belong to me, he said, bringing my hand to his lips, just like I belong to you, just like this baby belongs to both of us. 6 months later, I gave birth to Richard Alexander Sterling Hayes, named for the grandfather he'd never meet but whose legacy of honesty and integrity would guide his life. Alexander was there for every moment of labor, holding my hand and whispering words of love and encouragement. Beverly was sentenced to life in prison without parole for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Victoria received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy. The Matthews jewelry empire was restored to me, making me one of the wealthiest women in America. But the real wealth was in my arms. A healthy baby boy and a husband who'd proven that love really can conquer all lies, all betrayals, all the darkness that tries to tear people apart. You know, Alexander said one evening as we sat in our nursery, watching our son sleep, I used to think that losing my wallet was the worst thing that could happen to me. And now, I asked, settling into his arms, now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought me you. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And sometimes love really does find a way back home, even when that path leads through the darkest streets of life.